Hey, good evening, everybody. Craig Setzer with you on a Tuesday night. It is 9:31, and November 8th. And who thought we would be talking about a potential hurricane threat to Florida in early November? Pretty crazy, but that being said, we're talking about Nicole, which has gotten a little bit stronger this evening. We'll talk about Nicole as we wait for the 10 o'clock advisory. Now that we're on Eastern Standard Time, our advisories come in an hour earlier, which in some ways is good. In some ways is bad because I get up and do the morning advisory too. So that's 4:30 tomorrow morning. So I will see everybody who wants to get up that early at 4:30 tomorrow morning. But the good thing about YouTube is that you don't have to wake up and watch with me. You can sleep in and just watch it when you get up. All right, if you like the videos, be sure to click the like button. I see a lot of folks clicking the like. I really appreciate it. By subscribing, you increase its profile on YouTube, and of course get the notifications. And I think the notifications really work with the live, when I do these live streams, and when I just post regular videos. I guess, I don't know, people don't get notifications. Anyway, that being said, let's get right to it. And sorry about that. Lost the camera for a second there. Anyway, so what's going on here is we're looking at what I call our tropical threats and hurricane preps graphic. And if this is one of the first times you're joining us, this is how it goes. And by the way, you can see the crawl at the bottom of the screen there, also called the ticker. That was on the 7 p.m. intermediate advisory. Let's take that off so that when the new advisory comes in, it'll pop up with fresh information there at the bottom of the screen. So anyway, what we're looking at here is this tropical threats and hurricane preps. Really, this graphic is centered around if you get to the high category, then you're going to be making hurricane preps. And as you can see there, across East Central Florida, basically from Palm Beach County all the way up to Flagler County, folks should have been making their hurricane preps during the day today. Tomorrow's going to be a rough day because we're going to have these squalls moving through, and it's going to be rainy. And earlier in the weekend, and earlier in the week, actually, yesterday, I was talking about kind of our timeline for what we'll be doing. And we set aside Wednesday for the indoor preps. In other words, that's when we take care of things. We kind of prep our outside of our house to protect us from the hurricane. And then we prep our inside of the house to get through the hurricane. And of course, we do the hurricane supplies to get us after the hurricane. If we have power outages or difficulty getting out and things like that, we want to be able to kind of hang out at home until things improve and we can get out on the roads again and get back to normal. So here's where we stand tonight, and really this graphic hasn't changed too much in the last 12 or 18 hours. In fact, last night, once the hurricane warnings were issued there along the East Coast, that became a red area there. Red still for the Bahamas as well, and the Northwest Bahamas, unfortunately, is probably going to get hit. Not as bad as Dorian. Dorian was Cat 5, but this is probably going to be a Category 1 going through the Abacos there, as well as West End. Now, for those of you who kind of like to check in every now and then and look at your weather app or a satellite map or something, this island chain right here, West End in the Northwest Bahamas, is kind of a good marker point for, is the storm going to come into South Florida? If the storm tracks to the south of West End there during the day tomorrow, I think we're going to see more effects here in South Florida because the core is going to be closer. If the storm tracks over West End, then it's probably more likely going to be Palm Beach County and, of course, areas to the north because the storm is very lopsided. And if the storm comes over and then tracks to the north of West End right there, then it's going to be further away from South Florida. We'll still feel effects, but not as bad. So that's kind of this is going to be like our flag in the middle of the road here, and we'll see which side Nicole crosses, and that's going to happen during the day tomorrow. Let's talk about the way Nicole has been appearing this evening on the satellite loop. You can see earlier we had kind of a big burst of thunderstorms, and then that burst of thunderstorms has collapsed. Now, what shows up very, very nicely there is the circulation, the tropical circulation now, and what happened is that, and I think the reason the thunderstorms collapsed is because of some dry air that's worked into the system. I'll show you that in just a second as we're waiting on the 10 o'clock advisory. And once again, as soon as it comes in, we will we will. I'm seeing some of the chat folks chiming in with their weather reports. I really appreciate that. In Palm Beach County, the rain band that just came through. We'll show you that on radar in just a second. But back to when the advisory comes in, we'll go to it, and back to what's going on this evening. So the thunderstorm activity kind of waned for a while. It decreased, and now it looks like it's just about to start to fire back up there, and pretty close to the center as well. So right there you can see a little burst of thunderstorms starting to go up. So this is fairly typical with an organizing tropical system here. As they become more mature, they become more persistent. But this is, I would think, this kind of lull here in the thunderstorm activity is a good sign, because this lull has paused the intensification trend, so it hasn't gotten any stronger during this lull here, and it's also kind of shortened this whole timeline, because the storm only has about 24 to 30 hours now before it runs out of water to strengthen on. And so now we've kind of bought ourselves a little bit of time here. So that's a good thing. If this thing was still blowing up and producing big thunderstorms here, and persistent thunderstorms, and dropping the pressure and getting stronger, that would not be a good thing. So you always look at these as what's good, what's bad, what don't we know, stuff like that. And some things we just call it, well, it's not any worse. but this certainly is not a bad thing. In fact, I would say it's a good thing, because it's bought us a little time here on the intensification trend. Let's take a look at the water vapor loop, and then I'm going to show you from the hurricane hunters what they've been finding this evening. And what you can see there is all of this reddish tan area down here. That is all very dry air. And if you look carefully, you can almost make out that it's undercutting kind of those upper clouds there. And in fact, that is the case, and I'll show you that in just a second. So that's something that's going on here that is basically a limiting factor. There may also be a little bit of shear that's going on too, that's kind of working against the storm as well. In fact, let me do this. Let's go and take a look at the Hurricane Hunter track from this evening. This is, and I will actually update it, because this is updating. Let's see if there's anything new positions on it. Okay, so the plane is inbound now on its next penetration here, and it's going to do this right before 10 o'clock. So the Hurricane Center is probably going to wait until we get this next pass, the storm to go through there, the plane to go through the center of the storm, get a new fix on it, and that's what we will use for our 10 o'clock position. So we've got to wait for the plane to get through there. The Hurricane Center is going to be waiting on that, so the advisory might not come out until just about 10 o'clock. That's okay. We'll talk. I'll keep you busy until then. So one of the things what we're seeing is that the wind field on the north side of it, especially kind of the northeast side of it, and this is towards the southeast U.S. This is where this high pressure is sitting over the southeast U.S., and the low pressure of Nicole itself is creating this really strong pressure difference. So it's not surprising that we're seeing this big wind field on the north and northeast side of the storm there. That's not unexpected at all. One of the things that we can see that is indicating intensification is yesterday the strongest winds were way out here, over 100 miles away from the center. As we've gone through the evening now, I've seen reports of the winds anywhere from about 20 to 30 miles from the center. Now that's what we think of typically as a tropical storm, where we have these winds that are now have contracted because the pressure's been dropping. The thunderstorms help the pressure to drop. The winds have tightened up, and they've come in and contracted around the center there. So that is typically an indication of what we saw today, which was transition from subtropical to tropical, and also a sign that it's intensifying. Now, of note here, when we had this pause in the thunderstorm activity, the pressure actually rose just a little bit. It was at around 984 millibars, and it came up 2 millibars. I think once we get below about the 980, so in the 970s, that's going to be the wind that's probably going to support hurricane strength with the storm here. We had some pretty good winds around hurricane strength, but these winds were quite a bit higher up in the storm there, because the plane is flying higher up, around 10,000 feet. So when the winds typically get reduced as they get down to the water, the ocean surface there. So even though we might have hurricane force winds higher up in the storm, that's not what we classify as naming the storm a hurricane. They have to be it's about 30 feet or 33 feet above the ocean surface. That's the technical definition. But it has to be anywhere in the storm. It doesn't have to be all over the storm. And typically, once this typically when a storm becomes a hurricane, it's just that one area that had the hurricane winds and probably not representative of the whole storm. But this is a big storm and a big wind field around it too. So the NOAA G4 was out this evening as well, and they did what we call a synoptic surveillance mission. I can tell it's been a long day. I've been up since 4:15. And so they flew out from Lakeland, and then they kind of circumnavigated the storm. Then they did an inner, they did an outer, and this information goes into the models, so it helps the models there. But as they're going around, and this information that's helping the models, they are dropping what we call dropsondes. Now in the U.S., those dropsondes, those radiosondes are released from a balloon. They go up into the atmosphere. These are dropped from the plane at a pretty high altitude, and they drop down in the atmosphere. And so right over here, which was pretty representative there, that dropsonde looked like this. Now this is, I know, wow. Craig, what are you doing to us, huh? We just want to see the advisory. I'm stalling for time. And I'm also just kind of doing a little bit of what I'm looking at and what may or may not help Nicole to strengthen. So now this is what we would think of as a fairly moist atmosphere. This is high up. This is where the dropsonde splashed in the ocean. Here's around 18,000 feet there. And this is a trace of the temperature in red and basically what we call the dew point or moisture profile in green. And when the red and the green are close together, it means that the atmosphere is moist. And you can see here in this sounding, most of the atmosphere is fairly moist here, and that's on that left side of the storm. So that's kind of a moist environment there. But over on the right side of the storm, and this is coming in from I think it was this one. I think it was this one here or this one here. It was one of these over on the right, and that showed this, and this is a lot of dry air because there's a big difference between that green line and that red line. So that's around 20 to 30,000 feet. That's some dry air. There's even a little bit drier air lower down here, around 12 to 14,000 feet. And so this dry air, what happens is that it causes the thunderstorm updrafts and the rain droplets in the thunderstorm updrafts to evaporate and cool the air and then cause downdrafts. And that's kind of a resisting factor to a tropical storm or a hurricane from intensifying. So there is some of this dry air in the system here, and that is likely going to kind of limit how quickly it's going to develop. Now, it's not going to limit it developing at all, but it will probably limit how quickly it develops. So that's one of the things that we're kind of watching here as we go forward into time. There's the water vapor loop again. Let me put the center there, and you can see a couple of things there. The center, it's over time, it's probably going to get embedded in this moisture here. It's just that this dry air is kind of pushing on it right now. So once again, that likely kind of slowed down this intensification. Another thing to note here, this is the track, and you can see we had this wobble to the north here during the overnight hours last night, and that kind of lifted the whole forecast track to the north a little bit. And then we saw this sharp turn to the southwest. And that was like, oh, now if you kind of just average the whole thing out here, it's doing exactly like we were saying it was going to do. It's making this turn, moving to the southwest. It's just that it was kind of funny. It was moving northwest and then it was moving southwest. So it was from that motion to all of a sudden a different motion there. So now the real question is how far south is this motion going to go? And how long is it going to persist? Is it going to basically keep that up for a while and then kind of just go due west and then northwest, or is it not going to go quite as far south and then go straight? All these things are kind of in the models, which I'll show you in just a second, but these are all things that, of course, we're watching here. And so what's going to help determine where it goes and why it's going the way it's going right now also shows up in the water vapor loop, and it is this area right here, and it kind of outlines like that, and that is the high pressure system, this blocking high pressure system in the atmosphere, and it's pushing kind of Nicole to the southwest there. Nicole was going along, and all of a sudden, boy, it ran in and started sensing that blocking high, and so it turned to the left there. Now what's going to happen is, and you can see it showing up nicely here, here's this big dip in the jet stream. This is what we call progressive. In other words, it is moving across the country as opposed to just being stationary there. So it is going to come in, and it's going to break down this block, and as that block gets broken down, then this other high that's over to the east is going to start to take over and begin to turn Nicole to the northwest, and then the shear and the steering currents from this big dip, they are going to turn Nicole and accelerate Nicole very quickly to the northeast. But all of these little details, I mean, there's a lot going on here. And so in the big scheme of things, the difference between maybe there and there is not that much in the atmosphere. But for those of us on the ground who are going to be impacted by Nicole, it's a huge difference, a huge, huge difference. So, it's one of these things, and unfortunately, our models just aren't good enough yet to say exactly where it's going. And because of that, we have to over-prepare, and sometimes we have to make our warning areas a little bit bigger than they normally would be. If we knew exactly where this was going, could you imagine how easy it would be to prepare, to take care of the people that are immediately in the path of it, and get prep or recovery efforts ready to go right behind it? I mean, it would be an amazing world. It'd be nice. I hope it happens in my lifetime. I know that there's a lot of work being done on getting the models better. All right, so let's talk about the models, and this is what I call the reliable models. These are a combination of the hurricane models and also what are called the dynamic models and global models. So these forecast around the globe, but many of them do pretty good with tropical storms and hurricanes. And this is through 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So this yellow line here, this is the Navy model here. It has done very, very well this season here. It's kind of on the south side there, but you'll see in a second here it turns onto the north. Let me zoom in just a little bit here before we go further, because I want to just so you can see all these models here. So they're labeled. So there's the GFS right there in this light blue color. There's the European and the UK map, which is the British model there, and this TVCN, that's kind of the blend. So it's not really a model, but it's like a consensus of the models put together. And sometimes, like as we saw in Ian, if you have a few bad models in the model suite, then the TVN gets pulled off. But the models are in fair agreement here through tomorrow morning. And then we have a little bit of divergence there, and that's because the GFS kind of did this little track down to the south here. This is tomorrow evening. By tomorrow during the day, we're going to be able to see Nicole on the radar from the weather radars, the coastal weather radars, and so we're going to be able to track its position very, very closely. If it does manage to go a little bit farther south like this, this is south of Grand Bahama there, which we were talking about, our little kind of like flag in the road there to watch which side it goes on. This is going to put more of the hurricane force winds well into Palm Beach County and probably hurricane force gusts into Broward. But this model is a bit of an outlier. It tends to maybe over-respond to a blocking high or a ridge. One of the things it did with Ian was it was off to the left here, to the west, because I think it was sensing that the blocking high out here was too strong, or it just acted like it was stronger than it thought it was. So once again, now the blocking high is up here, so I think that's why this model's pushed a little bit south. The good news is that all of the models have not shifted to the south for South Florida, for Miami-Dade and Broward. The grouping is really here, and it hasn't changed that much. And you can see the earlier Hurricane Center's forecast is right there. So that is pretty much still on track. In fact, they might be just a little bit south of the consensus, which is that white line once again. But you know what? That's okay. Now, I know because I'm here in South Florida in Broward, this is kind of my reference point, so I often talk about what we're watching down here. Basically, from Palm Beach north, you folks we're not talking about are you going to get it, but unfortunately, how bad is it going to be? Are you going to have the core of the storm go over you? And unfortunately, because of the way that the storm is shaped, even if the center is right there, the storm wind field on the north is going to have a pretty big swath to the north of it. So there could be widespread power outages along into the north of the track. I don't know if they're going to be long duration. Usually we have to get into like the category 2 and the category 3 for them to be long duration. They might be widespread and temporary, maybe lasting less than a day or two. But that's one of the things that tomorrow evening before you go to bed, you'll need to prepare for power going out during the night. Unfortunately, this looks like it's going to be a nighttime event, and nighttime storms are often much, much scarier just because you can't see what's making the noise outside from the wind that's blowing. So just some things to consider there. All All right, so that is tomorrow evening. There we go into Thursday morning, and you can see all of the models are turning to the west-northwest there. It's just the question of, do they turn a little bit sooner so that we're on that track there, or do they turn a little bit later so we're a little bit farther to the south there? And that's really going to be kind of, I think, the thing we're going to be watching tomorrow is where does it turn? Where do we see, and we'll be tracking on the radar, we'll be saying, oh, is that a wobble, or is that a turn now to the west or to the west-northwest? So those are things we'll be watching with great care tomorrow, and then we'll probably be able to have a pretty good idea of where the worst is going to go by tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening in East Central Florida, so that you folks will be able to kind of think about mentally preparing what's going to be happening and how you're going to get through it, and we will get through it. So that's Thursday morning. There's Thursday evening, tomorrow evening, and now the storm is beginning to turn more to the northwest, and then eventually really zips on off to the northeast, kind of gets caught in that southwesterly jet stream wind and zips off to the northeast. Let's talk a little bit about the radar. I know some of you folks are seeing the rains and stuff like that kind of came in this evening, and this is why I was saying earlier today that we needed to have preparations wrapped up by sunset this evening in the hurricane zones, and anybody that's doing the preparing, because the weather is not going to get any better now. There's still going to be some lulls and some bands coming through between the bands, but when the bands come through, there are going to be really strong wind gusts, because just above the surface, the wind is blowing really, really hard. And so what happens is these rain squalls come through, they pull that wind momentum down to the surface. So this is going to be kind of the day where you don't want to go out tomorrow. Now, I think it was very wise for Miami-Dade and Broward to cancel schools tomorrow. No point in having kids on the bus in the morning, probably in wind and rain, and then even in worse conditions coming home from school in the afternoon. I think that was a really good decision there. And tomorrow, if you don't have plans to be out, by all means, just stay home. I'm probably going to try to stream all day, at least some form of some stream all day tomorrow. So that's what we're going to be watching there. Let's see, requests coming in from the Peanut Gallery, Get Jacksonville. So no showers yet. Of course, as the storm gets closer, we'll see some showers. Now over here, I've got this line here. That's the Hurricane Center's forecast from 4 p.m. this afternoon. So the point here is that's the 12-hour position, and that's the 24-hour position right there on the forecast track. That's from the earlier advisory, and I put that up just because I want to see when the new advisory comes in what's going to happen there. In terms of like specific communities and stuff like that, once again, too early kind of to tell. We just have that broad overview of, is it going to be a hurricane where the hurricane warnings are? That's the expectation. Tropical storm warning in Broward. That's where the expectation is of tropical storm conditions and the tropical storm watch in Miami-Dade. Let's talk briefly about the winds, because I think from south to north, so the Keys, 20 to 30 mile an hour winds, maybe some gusts over 40. Miami-Dade, 20 to 35 mile an hour winds, gust over 40 definitely in Miami-Dade, maybe some gusts to 50. In Broward, gusts probably, or winds sustained probably tomorrow night in the 40 mile an hour range, with gusts maybe up to 60. And then in Palm Beach County, probably sustained winds at least 50 to 60, with gusts above hurricane force into the 80 mile an hour range. And they could even be stronger if the storm center is farther to the south. And then Martin, St. Lucie, Volusia, Indian River, all could see hurricane force winds sustained for a time tomorrow night of 75 miles an hour, with gusts above 90 miles an hour. So that's kind of the breakdown there. Let me just real quickly, we'll show a few of the models here, and then because we're kind of killing some time here, we'll open it up to a little discussion and things like that. So this is the GFS, and this is from this afternoon's run through 48 hours. So you can see this was the one that tracked to the south of Grand Bahama there, and then across the state. This is the southmost model of all the models right now. The GFS is not that great with intensity, so you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. It's kind of relative to itself because it's a global model. But basically you can see it's going almost west-southwest right up until the point that it is just off the Palm Beach coast there, and then it starts to turn to the northwest. So that's the GFS. This is the H wharf, and the H wharf was one of the stronger models on the 12Z, the morning run. It's not quite as strong on this run. The pressure there is around 976 millibars, so that would be probably low end category 1, maybe a strong tropical storm, but probably low end category 1. I don't think it'd be much above low end category 1. And when I say low end, it's like 75 to 80 miles an hour or something like that. And you can see it turns more to the northwest as it's crossing the Florida Straits there in the Gulf Stream. So, and it kind of ends up in the northeast Gulf of Mexico. Now, it's not going to strengthen in the northeast Gulf, but it is going to turn the winds and potentially push storm surge up into the Big Bend area there, and maybe even a little storm surge in the Panhandle. This is the HAFS model. This is going to be the new hurricane model that's still being tested, but we're able to see it. Okay, well, there is the advisory starting to come in, so guess what? We will take a look at that, and let me get things set up here. And that's, I guess, the Hurricane Hunter plane was running a little bit ahead of schedule, so that is good news there. All right, so here it is, 10 o'clock, winds up to 70 miles an hour now, so it's just shy of hurricane strength. The pressure's been steady, and that's going to give us our crawl at the bottom of the screen. And their headline is, Nicole very near hurricane strength while headed for the northwest Bahamas. Changes with the watches and warnings. Storm surge watch has been extended west along the Florida Panhandle to Indian Pass. And that is it. So the storm surge watch has been extended west, meaning that the Hurricane Center may be thinking that the storm is going to go more into the northeast Gulf of Mexico there. So, but let's go ahead and break it down here. 70 mile an hour winds. One of the things I was talking about earlier in our earlier discussion was this number here. As that number keeps dropping there, that means that the storm is making southward progress as it moves to the west. Their value there is west-southwest at 10. Once again, the pressure unchanged from earlier, so the pressure's kind of steadied out there, even though the winds have kind of responded to that. So once we get around 980 or below, that's when we're going to be, as I said, in that hurricane, low-end hurricane range there, 150 miles to the east-northeast of Great Abaco Island there in the Bahamas right there. This yellow area here, that's the extent of the tropical storm conditions. On the edges here, it's just tropical storm gusts, but as you get closer to the center there, it's more sustained tropical storm conditions. And so I do our cone graphic like this because in this case, there's the cone. Look how tiny it is. And if you're in or out of the cone, it really doesn't matter because the tropical storm conditions are quite a bit bigger than that. That's the 7 a.m. position tomorrow morning. And that forecast is for Category 1 hurricane intensity tomorrow morning. So we're just shy of it now, so it's not going to take much to get us there to hurricane intensity. Going forward, there we are, 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. Now, the Hurricane Center's track looks very similar to their earlier track. It's got the slow turn starting to take place here. You can see that the tropical storm winds are just skirting Miami-Dade. They're a little more into Broward as we go forward here. They'll spread on out. And they are now into east central Florida. So this is tomorrow evening there. Here is 7 a.m. Thursday morning. This red area here is the expectation of hurricane conditions. And you can see it there expanding until it reaches the coast. Because what's going to happen is, as this is going to be just barely a hurricane, once it encounters land, the winds are going to start to come down. Now, it's still going to be a strong tropical storm. A strong tropical storm can do almost hurricane-like damage. Sometimes they're almost indistinguishable from each other between a strong tropical storm and a low-end Category 1. So really kind of this swath here going along there, you can think of as basically near or hurricane conditions. So once again, that is 7 a.m. on Thursday. There's the cone. Does it matter if you're in or out of the cone? No, of course not, because the cone is only tracking a single point where the storm is expected to be 2/3 of the time, and the storm is much, much bigger than that single point. So that's 7 a.m. Thursday. There's 7 p.m. Thursday. And I think the expectation is that if it is a little bit to the left here, then it's going to, as it approaches and as it leaves, bring some winds up from the south and southwest and kind of really pile in there into the Big Bend area, northeast Gulf of Mexico there. All right, so going forward here into time, there we are, 7 a.m. on Friday. So really across North Florida, everybody's at one point or another in the tropical storm conditions here. Tropical storm conditions are going to be a little bit stronger and probably more persistent to the right of that line there, the right of the track line there, and even up into southern Georgia there. And then it's zipping on off and really gets taken off quickly to the northeast. Forecast to be a tropical, either a depression or transitioning into just a low pressure area, non-tropical by Friday evening. The latest warnings, once again, there's really no changes. We have the tropical storm watches over much of the west coast. We have the tropical storm warnings, basically from southeast Georgia through Jacksonville, also inland areas through central Florida, including Orlando, all the way down to Lake Okeechobee and Broward County here. We have the hurricane watch. So remember, tropical storm warnings are tropical storm conditions expected. Tropical storm watch, which is still in effect for Miami-Dade, means it's possible. Tropical storm conditions are possible. And in Broward, as well as Lake Okeechobee and inland areas of Palm Beach County, we have the hurricane watch. Coastal Palm Beach and up to about Flagler, we have the hurricane warning. So that's kind of a breakdown. Really no changes there. At this point, there's not going to be anything dropped until the storm gets past. So even if the track shifts a little bit to the north, we're not going to be seeing any of these watches or warnings dropped here still ahead of the storm with the storm coming our way. So it's probably not going to be until Thursday that we start seeing some of these dropped, maybe in the Bahamas Wednesday night if things improve. All right, the storm surge there is the latest watch there. So we're running storm surge now from near just north of Tampa Bay, so basically Pasco, northern Pinellas County there, all the way up to the west. And we'll have to see if this is updated. Sometimes these things update a little bit late, and you can see the storm surge warning there on the East Coast with anywhere from 2 to 4, and in some places 5 feet of storm surge, and right up the St. Johns River as well. I'll tell you, poor folks in Jacksonville with your storm surge flooding. And also to take into account, this area here in central North Florida is still very saturated from Ian a month and a half ago, and so because it just takes a long time for the water to drain out, so flooding is potentially going to be a problem as well. Thankfully, this storm is going to be moving rather quickly. Let's break down the timelines, and then I will we'll kind of try to wrap it up here. I don't want to go real long tonight because I'm going to be doing this again tomorrow morning at 4:30. And I think we're almost to the point where it's baked into the cake, and what I mean by that is that there's not going to be any big changes or big swings or big new information or anything like that. We still probably have another 12 to 18 hours before it's really baked into the cake, and we have the center on radar, and we're tracking that, but we're kind of starting to get there now. So here's our timeline, and this is find where you are and pay attention to where you are, and when the yellow gets to your area, that's when we start seeing the more persistent tropical storm wind gusts, the stronger tropical storm wind gusts, and at times even the sustained tropical storm winds. And those arrows there, they're kind of representative of the wind direction. They're not going to be as representative right along the storm's track. So where the center is going, the winds are going to be flipping around more, but outside of that area, like here on the southwest coast where there's still a lot of debris, even up where Ian's path was, this is going to kind of help you hopefully prepare for what direction the winds are going to be coming from, the strongest winds. And so is there any way that you can secure the debris, or maybe if you have a tarp on your roof or something like that, reinforce that side. So right now we're looking at the northeast winds across the peninsula there, a little more northerly in Miami. And let's go forward into time here. There we are at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And so tropical storm conditions now just beginning to reach the coast. So it's going to be windy all night, but now the winds are going to start to pick up a little bit. We're going to see the strongest winds, of course, in the squalls, but now the winds are starting to pick up a little bit. So there's noon then for tomorrow, and you can see the tropical storm conditions into the Treasure Coast, into the Space Coast. In Miami-Dade, it's not yet. In Broward, just starting to get into it by the time we get to the lunchtime hour. And you can see Miami's winds starting to become more northwesterly, responding to the circulation, the counterclockwise circulation. There's 3 p.m. Tomorrow, and then the tropical storm conditions continuing to spread west. There's 6 p.m., almost to the Tampa Bay area now on the west coast. There's 9 p.m. tomorrow evening, and then there's midnight tomorrow night, and you can see the winds in Miami-Dade and likely Broward are becoming more westerly now, as well as the Keys. They're still northeasterly and northerly for the rest of the state. There we are at 3 a.m. And then by 6 a.m. you can see St. Lucy's wind has clicked around there. Miami's wind is now southwesterly, Port St. Lucie southeasterly, northeasterly in Orlando, and northwesterly in Tampa Bay, because the circulation center by this point is kind of sitting right in there according to the Hurricane Center's advisory. Going on forward into time here, you can see the weather is beginning to improve in South Florida, still windy, and deteriorating across North Florida. There's the northwest winds there in Punta Gorda and Port Charlotte and Fort Myers. And then going forward into time there, there's noon on Thursday, 3 p.m. on Thursday. And I'm going to kind of skip along here because I want to show you as the storm moves away, the winds become southerly here, and that's going to create that storm surge problem up in the Big Bend area there. And still, because of this persistent flow, now the winds go from northeast to east to southeast across the northeast part of the state. It's just going to be onshore flow, onshore flow, onshore flow. It's going to be hard to get the water out of there until the storm finally moves on off, and that's Friday at 7 p.m. All right, let me put the radar up. I'm just going to briefly go over what everybody's talking about here. And, a lot of people online. That's nice to see. So let's see. Do we think it'll have enough time to develop a solid eye wall? You know, that's a good question. This pause and the dry air around it may preclude it developing a solid eye wall. Through the evening, the hurricane hunters have been finding that the eye has been open for part of it. Now, it may be one of these kind of eye walls where it's like 3/4 of an eye wall rotating slowly around the center. But I think that, you know, we'll have the hurricane force winds, especially in the northern half of the eye wall, the northern side of the eye wall. So that's certainly going to be something to watch there. Let's see. Yeah, on the satellite, it did look like it was getting a little bit of, I wouldn't call it an eye, but what we'd call a dimple, where it's kind of a warm spot there in the middle. That was showing up on the satellite a little bit there. Let's see. So Dorian a few years ago kind of came up from the southeast and then was moving due west, and then it slowed down. And Dorian kind of had this transition between two steering currents. So what happened was that Dorian got very strong and was being steered to the west, and then the steering currents changed from one blocking high to another blocking high. And during that transition between the two blocking highs, Dorian basically just coasted to a stop and crushed the Northwest Bahamas there, the Abacos, the Out Islands, as well as Grand Bahama. This is not going to be that case where the storm stops, and it's also not going to be the case where the storm is very strong. There's still going to be some storm surge flooding, especially on the northern side of Grand Bahama there, because of that north wind blowing the water up into the shallows there on the Bahama banks there. But this is not going to be like a Dorian situation. Now, any hurricane in the Bahamas, trust me, it's very bad, but this is not going to be as bad as Dorian. Let's see. You're welcome for the coverage. Yeah, Francis and Jean. So for those of you who were here in 2004, we had Francis that kind of came up from the southeast and then turned to the west and crossed right at a place called Sewell Point, which is on Hutchinson Island near Fort Pierce. I want to say Fort Pierce. Jensen Beach, right? Jensen Beach, yeah. So, so that crossed, and then I think it was like a month later, Jean came along, and Jean was moving to the north out in the Atlantic, and everybody's like, oh, we're not going to have to worry about this. And Jean got caught under a high pressure area and did a big loop. Let me I'll just illustrate that. If you look it up online, you can see what Jean did. So that's the track there, by the way, of Nicole. So Jean did one of these. Jean came up, and then it did this. And boom, and came in and came right into the same exact spot. Seward's Point there in Jensen Beach and just north of Stuart, Florida. So a bad situation. Is this going to be a three-peat? Let's hope not. You know, it's a beautiful area all up and down the Treasure Coast there up to the Space Coast. Beautiful parts of South Florida. Unfortunately, the beaches are really going to kind of pay a toll here with all the pounding from the surf and everything going on. Oh, by the way, let me do this real quickly. Let's see what that was the earlier track there. Let me put on the other track here, the new track, and we'll see. So the new track shifts a little bit to the right, which means north. So there was the old forecast point. The new forecast point for 24 hours is there. So it's not any farther south. It's fairly similar to what we were looking at before. Let's see. A lot of storms do strike at night. I don't know why. We went through a series though, like Michael, as well as Irma, and Ian, of course, this year, which struck during the daytime. Yep, good wind gusts. Thanks for reporting the good wind gusts. Wind speeds are picking up a little bit. Some folks have had 35-mile-an-hour wind gusts. So Brevard, you're kind of in that northern edge of that hurricane zone there as well. Some wind, mostly rain. So in this case, the backside is probably not going to be the worst side. The northern half is going to be the worst side just because of the way the pressure is oriented around it here. Usually the right side. So if we think of the storm as moving to the west here, then this is the right side over here. And that's where the worst of the weather is. The worst of the storm is going to be from the center to the right side. All right, the key is dry air. Okay, what about this little southward jog folks are saying? So, you know what, we're going to have to watch this really carefully, and we'll be able to see it tomorrow because the storm will be more in the radar range, and then by tomorrow afternoon, we'll see it a little bit more to the in the radar range, and we'll be able to track and see what's going on there. Let's see. Daytona, Daytona kind of all up there with the kind of on the northern edge of that hurricane condition area. The little jog to the south, we're going to watch for that. And folks, folks up the coast, north of the Space Coast, north of the Cape there, they're going to be watching for a little jog north as well. Lots of evacuations along the coastal areas. I don't know why the media, I'm not in the media anymore, I don't know why they were, it's a lot of people said, wow, they're not paying attention to this. So, I kind of jumped on it, I think, on Twitter last week, and then I think Friday or Saturday I was already doing stuff online. So I don't think we'll see winds above 100 miles an hour with the storm. I don't think we'll see winds much above 85 miles an hour, sustained winds. The gust, of course, could be close to 100 miles an hour. Cat 2, I don't think so, and the reason I don't think so is because of the way it behaved this evening with that dry air. So in essence, the storm is literally trying to process its environment and trying to improve it. It just doesn't have a lot of time, though. We're 30 hours from reaching land, and once land happens, then the conditions stop. So tornado watches, on Ian, the right front quadrant. So once again, on the right front quadrant, it's going to be over here. So northeast Florida, basically central, and northeast Florida, you're going to have to watch out for possible tornadoes there. Let's see, Chicago on Friday, I think you'll be fine. And I think it's going to be cool up there too. In fact, much of the country is going to cool off from what I saw. Impacts for Charlotte County, kind of like we described, maybe some tropical storm gusts. But unfortunately, because of all the damage there, it's not going to take much to kind of mess things up in terms of just blowing the debris around in the homes that are already damaged. I don't think Cat 2. Sustained winds around 30 miles an hour in Nassau. Thanks for that report. And rain bands. Let's see. I think that is about it. So Osceola County, that's Central Florida. So pressure keeps dropping. Cat 2. I never want to say, so here's the thing, and we'll kind of wrap up on this. I never want to say with a hurricane or a tropical storm, definitely, these words, definitely, never, absolutely, because you always have to caveat these things with the possibility of the uncertainty, meaning that it may not turn out exactly like you think it's going to happen. And that's kind of the way I operate with this, because you never want to be surprised. Could it become a very, very minimal Cat 2 with winds at 95 miles an hour? It's a very, very low possibility. It's not zero, but it's also an unlikely possibility. So I think we're probably going to have enough on our hands with Category 1 here. So we'll just take that for now, okay, and not get concentrate on Cat 2. We're going to deal with the Cat 1, and that's going to be enough. Can you go to the beach on Thursday? I think it depends on where you are, as long as you're not kite surfing or, the weather's going to be pretty bad, especially along the East Coast. So, all right, guys, you know what? I'm going to wrap it up once again. If you like it, please click the like button. I really appreciate all the support there. That kind of helps support the channel. The subscribe button also apparently helps the channel. And then if you get the notification button, then maybe you'll be alerted tomorrow morning at 4:30 in the morning when we give another update there. The reason I'm doing the update at 4:30 in the morning is because I want, in case there's any changes at all, I don't want anybody to be surprised. Like if something crazy, which I don't think is going to happen, but if something crazy happens overnight, I think we need to know as soon as possible. And so that'll be the 4 a.m. advisory. You don't have to tune in. It's kind of like a time change. You don't have to get up at 2 a.m. to set your clocks back. Just when you get up, you can find it on YouTube and check for that. So. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate all the support once again, and I will see everybody tomorrow, okay?